He thought she was just a poor technician. He had no idea she was the secret billionaire genius who built his entire $2 billion empire. And when he kicked her out for his mistress, he signed his own death warrant. Hi my dear friends. Welcome back to my channel. Before we begin this beautiful story, please subscribe and turn on notifications, like this video to spread the love. Comment below what you're hoping to see. Share with someone who loves romantic stories. Please help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support helps us bring you more heartwarming tales. Now, my prayer for you: may you be blessed with long life and prosperity. May love, peace, and abundance follow you today and always. May God grant you good health, happiness, and every desire of your heart. Now, let's begin our story. The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor of the executive suite, glittering shards scattering like fallen stars as Seojin Kim's world began its inevitable collapse. But he didn't know that yet. In this moment, on this crystalline October evening in Seoul, he stood at the pinnacle of everything he believed he'd built, everything he thought he owned, everything he was about to lose. The Grand Hyatt ballroom buzzed with the electric energy of success. Over 300 of South Korea's tech elite had gathered to witness Haerin Tech's greatest triumph, the launch of the Quantum Sync operating system, a technological marvel that promised to revolutionize how the world interacted with artificial intelligence. Camera flashes exploded like fireworks as Seojin Kim, the 34-year-old CEO with the sharp jawline and sharper ambition, raised his arms in victory. His custom-tailored Tom Ford suit caught the light just right. His smile was perfectly practiced, and his speech had been flawless. The tech blogs would call him a visionary by morning. Forbes would feature him within the month. He was untouchable, or so he believed. In the back of that same ballroom, hidden behind a column decorated with white orchids, stood the woman who had actually created everything Seojin was celebrating. Yoona Park wore a simple black dress, nothing designer, nothing memorable, and her name tag identified her only as technician, R&D department. No one looked at her, and no one ever did. That was exactly how she designed it. Her brilliant mind had learned early that invisibility was sometimes the price of peace, that genius could be mistaken for threat, and that a woman in tech who wanted to actually create needed to disappear behind her creations. So she became a ghost. She became Nova. Yoona's fingers traced the edge of her phone, where lines of code she'd written at 3 in the morning still glowed on her screen. The Quantum Sync system, every algorithm, every innovative breakthrough, every impossible problem solved had poured from her mind like water from a broken dam. She'd submitted it all anonymously through the company's innovation portal, using the pseudonym that had become legendary in Haerin Tech's inner circles. Nova, the mysterious genius no one could identify. The phantom innovator who appeared whenever the company faced extinction and delivered miracles. She watched her husband accept another round of applause, and something twisted in her chest. Not quite pain, not quite pride. Something more complicated, something that tasted like copper on her tongue. 3 years ago, Seojin had slipped a platinum ring on her finger in a small ceremony attended only by his mother and her older brother. He'd promised her partnership, collaboration, a future built together. But the very next day, he'd asked her to keep their marriage private. Just until the company stabilizes, he'd said, his hands gentle on her shoulders, his eyes earnest. The board is old-fashioned. They won't understand a CEO married to a technician. They'll think it's nepotism. They'll question every decision I make. Once we're established, once we're secure, we'll tell everyone. I promise. Yoona had believed him. She always believed him. That was her fatal flaw, though she didn't know it yet. The months had turned into years. The secrecy had calcified into routine. At work, Seojin called her Miss Park with professional distance. At home, he still called her my love, though his affection often felt distant, as if his thoughts were elsewhere. Yoona had convinced herself this was only temporary. Success, she believed, was just around the corner. Soon, they would stand together in the light, instead of her quietly supporting him from the shadows. But tonight, as she watched him accept praise for work she had done, something inside her shifted. A small crack appeared in the foundation of the acceptance she had carefully built around her heart. "He's really impressive, isn't he?" said the voice beside her. Yuna turned to see Minji, another technician from the R&D department. The older woman's tone carried admiration mixed with curiosity. "Though I hear he's not as available as people think." Yuna tightened her grip on her phone. "What do you mean?" Minji leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You haven't heard about him and Director Seo? Hyun Seo from marketing?" She paused, clearly enjoying the suspense. "They've been spending a lot of time together lately. Late meetings, private discussions, constant calls. My friend in marketing says Hyun barely has regular duties anymore. She mostly manages Seojin's schedule now, and suddenly she's one of the most important people in the company." The name landed heavily in Yuna's mind. Hyun Seo, the childhood friend. The woman Seojin had known since their school days. The woman he had personally hired 6 months ago, despite her average experience, explaining simply that she needed a fresh start. "They're just friends," Yuna said automatically, the words protective and rehearsed. "They grew up together." Minji gave a knowing smile. "Friends don't usually look at each other the way those two do." She gestured toward the stage, where Seojin had just finished speaking and was stepping down. A stylish woman in a striking red dress approached him immediately. Hyun Seo slipped her arm through his, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Yuna watched her husband's face brighten in a way she hadn't seen in months. He laughed freely at something Hyun said, relaxed and open, and a quiet chill settled in Yuna's chest. She left the event without saying goodbye. And no one noticed. The following Monday brought news that changed everything, though Yuna didn't yet understand how deeply. Sitting in the small restroom of a convenience store near Heron Tech's headquarters, she stared at the test result in her hands. "Pregnant." The word echoed in her thoughts, bringing waves of emotion. Joy, fear, hope, uncertainty. She had felt unusually tired and emotional for weeks but had blamed stress. Heron Tech was struggling. Their main competitor, Dreamsoft, had released a stronger product. Stock prices were dropping. The board was demanding solutions. Seojin had been working long hours, often coming home late and exhausted. Yuna had barely spoken to him properly in days. And now this. A baby. Their baby. She imagined telling him, watching his expression change with surprise and happiness. She imagined him finally acknowledging their marriage publicly. She imagined them standing together, facing the future as a family. She imagined everything becoming better. But first, she had to save his company once again. That night, alone in their penthouse while Seojin worked late, Yuna sat at her computer and began designing a solution. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, lines of code forming with focus and care. Each line was an act of quiet devotion to the future she hoped for. She was building security not with words, but with ideas, determination, and skill. Despite her growing fatigue, she continued working, pausing only to rest briefly before returning to her screen. By dawn, she had created the foundation of what would become Heron Tech's turning point, a powerful update that could surpass Dreamsoft's innovation and restore confidence in the company. At 6 in the morning, tired but resolute, Yuna submitted her work through the company's innovation portal, unaware that this contribution would change everything. The submission was tagged with her usual pseudonym, Nova. Then she crawled into bed beside her sleeping husband, one hand resting on her still flat stomach, and allowed herself to dream of the moment she'd tell him their secret. She never got the chance. The crisis at Heron Tech intensified instead of resolving. Despite Nova's brilliant submission, which the development team was rushing to implement, the damage to investor confidence had been severe. The board scheduled emergency meetings. Major clients threatened to jump ship. The tech press smelled blood in the water and circled like sharks. Seojin stopped coming home entirely. He converted his office into a makeshift bedroom, surviving on coffee and adrenaline. When Yuna tried to visit him, bringing homemade soup and concern, his assistant turned her away. "The CEO isn't seeing anyone right now. Company policy during crisis management." But apparently company policy had exceptions. Yuna discovered this on a Thursday afternoon when she went to the executive floor to deliver technical specifications Nova had anonymously provided to help the development team. She timed her visit carefully, knowing Seojin had a board meeting and wouldn't be there. She couldn't risk him recognizing her handwriting on the documents, couldn't risk exposure. Not yet. Not until everything was perfect. The executive suite was supposed to be empty. It wasn't. Through the glass walls of Seojin's office, Yuna saw her husband and Hyun Seo. They stood close, too close. Hyun's hand on Seojin's arm, her head tilted in that way beautiful women do when they want to seem vulnerable. Seojin's expression was soft, unguarded, almost tender. He said something and Hyun laughed, the sound carrying through the glass like wind chimes. Then she moved closer, and for one terrible moment, Yuna thought they would kiss. They didn't. Seojin stepped back, creating professional distance, his hand rising in a gesture that clearly said, "Stop." But the moment had lasted too long. The intimacy had been too obvious. And when Hyun's face crumpled with practiced sadness, when tears began to slide down her porcelain cheeks, Seojin pulled her into an embrace that made Yuna's world tilt sideways. She left the specifications with a confused intern and fled to the women's bathroom on the floor below, where she locked herself in a stall and pressed both hands against her mouth to muffle the sound of her breaking. That evening, Seojin came home for the first time in 5 days. Yuna had prepared his favorite meal, galbi jjim, the short ribs slow-cooked until they fell apart, and set the table with candles. She'd planned this moment carefully. She would tell him about the baby. She would ask him about Hyun. She would clear the air and reclaim her marriage before it slipped away completely. But Seojin walked through the door already talking on his phone, his attention fractured into 1,000 pieces. He ate mechanically while reading emails on his tablet, mumbling responses to questions Yuna hadn't asked. When she tried to start a conversation, he held up one finger, wait, and took another call. Hyun, no, don't worry about it. I'll handle the board. Yes. I know they're being unreasonable. You did your best, and no one blames you. His voice was warm, reassuring, intimate in a way that made Yuna's prepared speech die in her throat. She went to bed alone that night, her hand on her stomach, whispering promises to the tiny cluster of cells that had already become the most important thing in her world. I'll protect you, she said into the darkness. No matter what happens, I'll make sure you're safe. 3 days later, Lumina Tech announced Nova's revolutionary update. The tech world exploded with excitement. Stock prices surged. Clients renewed their contracts. The crisis evaporated like morning mist. Seojin was hailed as a genius leader who had steered his company through turbulent waters. The business press published glowing profiles about his vision and leadership. No one mentioned Nova, and no one ever did. The mysterious innovator remained anonymous, their contributions absorbed into the company's collective success, their genius attributed to Seojin's guidance and inspiration. Yuna watched from the shadows and said nothing. This was how it worked. This was what she'd chosen. She told herself it didn't matter who got the credit, that she created for the love of creation, that recognition was vanity. She almost believed it. The celebration party was scheduled for Friday evening at an upscale restaurant in Gangnam. The entire company was invited, from executives to interns. It was meant to be a moment of unity, of shared triumph, of collective joy. Instead, it became the night everything shattered. Yuna arrived late, delayed by another bout of morning sickness that had struck with particular violence. She changed clothes 3 times, trying to find something that hid the slight bloating around her middle, something that made her feel beautiful, something that would catch her husband's eye. She settled on a simple navy dress and told herself tonight would be the night. She would pull Seojin aside, away from the crowd, and tell him about the baby. The crisis was over. They could finally move forward. The restaurant was packed with celebrating employees, the noise levels somewhere between enthusiastic and deafening. Yuna spotted Seojin immediately. He stood at the center of a group of board members, champagne glass in hand, his smile bright and false in the way she'd learned to recognize. He hated these events, she knew. He found small talk exhausting. He wanted to be home, working on the next problem, chasing the next innovation. Except he didn't look exhausted now. He looked energized, animated, alive in a way Yuna hadn't seen in months. And the reason stood beside him, radiant in a red dress that matched the one from the launch party, her hand resting lightly on his forearm with casual ownership. Hyun Seo laughed at something a board member said, and Seojin laughed with her, their timing synchronized like dancers who'd rehearsed together for years. Yuna's phone buzzed with a text from her brother. Saw the news about hair and tech. Your husband must be thrilled. When are you going to tell people you're married to Mr. Genius CEO? Never, Yuna thought, watching Seojin and Hyun move through the crowd together like a match set. Maybe never. She was about to leave, to abandon this entire painful evening, when Minji appeared at her elbow with a drink and a pitying expression. You should hear what people are saying, she said, gesturing toward a cluster of marketing employees. Apparently, Director Seo is about to get a major promotion, VP of Strategy. Everyone's saying she's earned it because of how much she's been supporting the CEO during the crisis. Yuna's nausea had nothing to do with pregnancy this time. The evening spiraled into nightmare slowly, then all at once. The restaurant had a second floor with a private terrace overlooking the city, accessible by a narrow staircase lined with potted orchids. Around 9 o'clock, Seojin excused himself from the main party, telling his companions he needed air, needed a moment of quiet before the final round of toasts. Hyun followed him 3 minutes later, her movements deliberate and calculated. Yuna, driven by instinct and dread, followed them both. She reached the base of the staircase just in time to hear Hyun's voice, pitched to Carrie. Seojin, please, just listen to me for 1 minute. I know you think we're just friends, but I can't keep pretending. I can't keep watching you throw your life away on someone who doesn't understand you, who doesn't see your brilliance. Hyun, stop. Seojin's voice was tired, strained. We've talked about this. You're my friend. That's all. I'm married. I love my wife. Do you? Hyun's laugh was brittle. When's the last time you even saw her? When's the last time she supported you the way I have? I've been there for every crisis, every late night, every impossible decision. Where has she been? Yuna started up the stairs, her heart hammering, her hands shaking. She needed to stop this. She needed to reclaim her husband before Hyun's poison sank any deeper. She needed the world tilted. Her foot caught on something, her own dress hem, a slick spot on the marble, faded itself, and suddenly she was falling backward. Her body weightless and terrified, her hands grasping for purchase on air that offered no salvation. She heard screaming, couldn't tell if it was her own voice or someone else's. She felt impact, pain exploding through her back and hip as she collided with the stairs. She felt the sickening sensation of continuing to fall, tumbling, bouncing, her body a rag doll obeying only gravity's merciless commands. And then she felt nothing but white-hot agony as she finally stopped, crumpled at the base of the stairs, her vision swimming with stars. Above her, more screaming, footsteps thundering down the stairs. Hyun's voice high and panicked. She came at me. She tried to push me. Oh my God, Seojin. She attacked me. More footsteps, hands on her shoulders. Seojin's voice, but distant, wrong, angry. What the hell were you thinking, Yuna? What were you doing? She tried to speak, to explain, to defend herself, but her words came out as gasps. Pain radiated from her abdomen in waves that terrified her. The baby! Oh God, the baby! Call an ambulance, someone yelled. Call the police, someone else added, and Yuna's blood turned to ice. Through her swimming vision, she saw Seojin help Hyun sit down, saw him examine the other woman's barely scratched arm with tender concern, saw him look back at Yuna not with worry but with something that looked terrifyingly like disgust. And she understood, in that crystalline moment of agony and clarity, that she'd already lost everything that mattered. The ambulance arrived, the paramedics loaded her onto a stretcher. Seojin rode with Hyun in a separate ambulance, his choice clear, his priorities obvious. At the hospital, alone and terrified, Yuna felt the cramping begin. She knew what it meant. She'd read enough pregnancy books in secret to understand what was happening. She called for the nurse, her voice breaking, tears streaming down her face. The baby, she managed to say. Please. I'm pregnant. Please save my baby. But some things, once set in motion, cannot be stopped. Some losses are inevitable. Some endings are written in blood. By midnight, Yuna Park had lost her child, her marriage, and her last remaining illusion about the man she'd loved enough to make invisible. She lay in a hospital bed, empty in every way a person can be empty, and stared at the ceiling while nurses murmured sympathetic nonsense and doctors discussed discharge procedures. Seojin arrived at 2 in the morning, his face haggard and confused. He stood in the doorway of her room like a stranger, like someone who'd wandered into the wrong life. You were pregnant? The words came out flat, disbelieving. When were you going to tell me? Yuna looked at him and felt nothing. The numbness was a blessing. Tonight, she said. I was going to tell you tonight. If that's true, then why were you attacking Hyan? Why were you? I wasn't attacking anyone. Her voice was hollow, mechanical. I was coming to talk to you, to tell you about our baby, to ask you about your relationship with her. I fell. That's all. I just fell. That's not what everyone says. The witnesses all what witnesses? Yuna's laugh tasted like poison. You mean Hyan's marketing team? The people who depend on her for their careers? Those witnesses? Seojin's face hardened. Don't do this. Don't try to make her the villain just because you're hurt. Hyan has been nothing but supportive. She's been my rock during the worst period of my professional life. You've been. Where have you been, Yuna? When's the last time you asked about my work? When's the last time you contributed anything to this company? The irony would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. Yuna looked at her husband, this brilliant, blind, arrogant man, and saw him clearly for perhaps the first time. He genuinely didn't know. He genuinely believed he'd built everything alone. He genuinely thought his success was his own. I want a divorce, she said quietly. The words hung in the sterile air like smoke. Seojin stared at her, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Finally, you don't mean that. You're emotional. You're hurt. Let's talk about this when I've never meant anything more in my entire life. Yuna turned her face toward the window, toward the Seoul skyline glittering with possibility and promise. Get out, Yuna, get out. He left. Of course he left. That's what men like Seojin Kim did. They took what they needed and left everything else behind. Alone in the darkness, Yuna placed both hands on her empty abdomen and made a promise to the child she'd never meet. I'll make them see. I'll make them all see. I'll stop being invisible. And outside her hospital room, beyond her knowing, the first domino began to fall. In Heron Tech's innovation portal, the account belonging to Nova went dormant. The mysterious genius who had saved the company time and time again simply vanished, taking all their brilliance with them into the darkness. Seojin Kim, standing in the hospital parking lot at 3 in the morning, his marriage dissolving and his world shifting beneath his feet, had no idea that his greatest success was also about to become his greatest failure. The question that would haunt him for the next 6 months was still unformed, still waiting in the wings of his consciousness. Who was Nova? And why had they disappeared the exact same night his wife asked for a divorce? The divorce papers landed on Seojin Kim's desk exactly 7 days after the hospital, and with them came an absence so profound it seemed to have physical weight. The silence where Yuna used to be wasn't just quiet, it was archaeological, like discovering ruins of a civilization he'd never known existed in the first place. He signed the documents with a hand that trembled slightly, telling himself it was fatigue, telling himself it was stress, telling himself it was anything except the truth that was slowly, inevitably, beginning to surface in his consciousness like a body rising from deep water. But truth, as Seojin would soon discover, had patience. It could wait. It had already waited 3 years. What couldn't wait was the crisis now consuming Heron Tech like wildfire through dry timber. The first sign appeared on a Tuesday morning, innocuous as a paper cut and just as deceptively painful. Kim Doyeon, the head of development, stood in Seojin's office with the expression of a man delivering news of terminal illness. Nova hasn't responded to any of our messages, he said, his tablet clutched against his chest like a shield. We've sent 47 requests through the innovation portal. Every single one has gone unanswered. It's been 2 weeks. Seojin looked up from his computer, irritation flickering across his features. So reach out through their alternative contact. We must have an email, a phone number or something. Doyeon's silence was answer enough. You're telling me, Seojin said slowly, his voice dropping into that dangerous register his employees had learned to fear, that we've been depending on an anonymous source for our most critical innovations, and we have no way to contact them except through an internal portal they're now ignoring. The previous CDO set up the system that way. Nova insisted on complete anonymity. They said it allowed them to work without bias or pressure. We respected that because... Doyeon trailed off, but the end of that sentence hung in the air between them like smoke. Because Nova had never failed them before. Because Nova had been reliable as sunrise. Because Nova had been the invisible foundation upon which Seojin had built his entire empire. Find them, Seojin ordered, his jaw tight. I don't care what it takes. Hire a forensic ID team, trace the portal submissions, offer them money, offer them stock options, offer them whatever they want. Just find them. But Nova, like Hyuna, had vanished into thin air, and Seojin Kim was about to learn what it meant to build a castle on sand. The days that followed had the quality of slow-motion disaster, the kind where you can see the collision coming but cannot possibly move fast enough to prevent it. Tech's pipeline of innovation simply stopped. The projects in development began hitting roadblocks that no one could solve. The elegant coding solutions that had always materialized mysteriously from Nova's submissions were nowhere to be found. Engineers who had grown dependent on those anonymous innovations suddenly discovered they'd forgotten how to think creatively, how to push boundaries, how to do anything except implement the genius of someone else. The company, Seojin realized with creeping horror, had become addicted to brilliance it couldn't reproduce. Stock prices began a gradual decline. Not catastrophic, not yet, but steady as a heartbeat weakening. Investors started asking questions in conference calls, their voices carrying undertones of concern that would metastasize into panic if not addressed soon. Competitors smelled opportunity. The tech press, always hungry for narrative reversal, began publishing articles with headlines that felt like obituaries. Has Tech lost its magic? And the mystery of the missing Midas touch. And through it all, Hyun Seo remained at Seojin's side, her presence constant as gravity, her support unwavering as stone. She'd been officially promoted to VP of Strategy in the wake of the celebration party, her elevation attributed to her invaluable contributions during the company's recent crisis. She attended every meeting, offered opinions on every decision, positioned herself as Seojin's right hand and trusted confidant. The office had stopped whispering about whether they were involved and started simply assuming they were. Seojin, drowning in corporate chaos and personal confusion, told himself he was grateful for her support. He told himself their relationship was purely professional. He told himself the guilt that gnawed at him whenever he looked at her had nothing to do with Hyuna's accusations and everything to do with the stress of keeping the company afloat. He was lying, of course. But lies, like truth, require time to ripen. 3 weeks after the divorce papers were signed, Seojin found himself alone in his office at 2 a.m, surrounded by reports that painted an increasingly grim picture. Revenue projections were down. 2 major clients had declined to renew their contracts, citing concerns about Tech's future innovation capacity. 3 key engineers had resigned, accepting offers from competitors. The company that had seemed invincible just months ago was showing cracks in its foundation, and those cracks were spreading. In desperation, Seojin did something he hadn't done in months. He opened his personal email, not his work account, but the private one he shared only with family and close friends, and found himself staring at old messages from Hyuna. Mundane things mostly. Reminders about dinner reservations. Questions about his schedule. Small domestic exchanges that felt like artifacts from someone else's life. He scrolled back further, searching for something he couldn't name, and found a message from 2 years ago. The subject line read, "I'm proud of you." Inside, Hyuna had written a short paragraph about a presentation he'd given at a tech conference. She'd praised his vision, his delivery, his leadership, and at the end, almost as an afterthought, she'd written, "The quantum core algorithm you presented was brilliant. The way it balances processing speed with energy efficiency is genuinely revolutionary. Whoever on your team came up with that deserves a medal. Seojin stared at those words, a cold sensation spreading through his chest. The quantum core algorithm had been one of Nova's submissions. He'd presented it as part of Heron Tech's innovation, never questioning where it came from, never wondering who had actually created it. But Yuna had recognized its brilliance immediately, had understood its technical sophistication in a way that suggested no.it was impossible. Yuna was a technician, capable certainly, but not a visionary, not a genius, not Nova. Except there was something tugging at the edges of his memory now, something he'd been too blind or too arrogant to see before. The way Yuna would sometimes make casual observations about technical problems that would turn out to be exactly right. The way she'd deflect credit with self-deprecating humor whenever someone praised her insights. The way she'd worked late hours in their home office, her fingers flying across her keyboard with the kind of fluency that suggested deep expertise rather than simple competence. The way Nova's submissions had stopped the exact same week Yuna had left. Seojin closed his laptop with enough force to crack the casing slightly, the sound echoing in his empty office like a gunshot. He refused to follow that train of thought any further. It led nowhere useful, nowhere possible, nowhere he could afford to go while his company was hemorrhaging value and reputation. But seeds once planted have a terrible tendency to grow. 4 weeks after the divorce, while Seojin was still desperately trying to stabilize Heron Tech's slow-motion collapse, Yuna Park was sitting in a minimalist office in Gangnam across from a man who represented everything Seojin Kim was not. Kwon Kyungmin was 42 years old, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the kind of quiet confidence that came from having built and sold 3 successful companies before most people finished their first startup. He was a venture capitalist now, a kingmaker in Seoul's tech scene, and he'd requested this meeting with Yuna specifically. "I've been following your work for 6 years, Kyungmin said, sliding a thin folder across the glass table between them. "Since your graduate thesis on neural network optimization at KAIST. That paper should have won awards. It should have launched a career. Instead, you disappeared." Yuna's expression remained carefully neutral, but her fingers tightened slightly on her coffee cup. "I didn't disappear. I took a job at Heron Tech." As a technician, Kyungmin's tone wasn't judgmental, just observational. "Someone with your credentials in your mind, working as a technician. It never made sense to me." He tapped the folder, "until I started noticing patterns. Every major breakthrough at Heron Tech over the past 3 years has a similar signature in the code structure. The same elegant problem-solving approach. The same innovative thinking. The same genius." He paused, his eyes locked on hers. "The same genius as your graduate thesis." The silence that followed was electric with implication. "I can't confirm what you're suggesting," Yuna said carefully. "I'm not asking you to confirm anything." Kyungmin leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at his lips. "I'm offering you something instead. Capital, infrastructure, complete control. I want to fund whatever you want to build next, Miss Park. No strings attached, and no hidden agendas. Just your brilliant mind, my resources, and the chance to create something that's actually yours." Yuna felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not quite hope. She'd learned hope was dangerous, but something adjacent to it, possibility perhaps. The shape of a future she'd never allowed herself to imagine. "Why?" she asked. "Why me?" "You could invest in anyone. Because talent like yours is rare enough to be precious, and because you've been systematically erased from your own accomplishments." Hyungmin's voice carried an edge of anger now, not directed at her but at the situation she'd endured. "Because I've watched too many brilliant people, especially brilliant women, get buried under other people's success. And because, frankly, I think you're about to revolutionize the entire industry, and I want to be part of that story." The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the end of it, Yuna had agreed to nothing, promised nothing, committed to nothing. But she'd left Kyungmin's office with a folder full of financial projections, partnership terms, and most importantly, belief. Someone saw her. Someone recognized what she could do. Someone thought she was worth backing. For the first time since the hospital, since the baby, since the divorce, Yuna felt the stirring of something that felt dangerously like purpose. That night, alone in the small apartment she'd rented after leaving the penthouse she'd shared with Seojin, Yuna opened her laptop and began to code. Not for Tech, not for Nova, not for anyone except herself. She wrote code the way other people write poetry, each algorithm a stanza, each solution a verse. She was building something new, something revolutionary, something that would make everything she'd created before look like a rough draft. She was building revenge disguised as innovation, or perhaps innovation disguised as revenge. She wasn't entirely sure which, and she didn't particularly care. The weeks began to blur into months, and two parallel stories unfolded in Seoul's tech scene like mirror images inverting. As Tech continued its slow descent, as Seojin fought increasingly desperate battles to maintain market share and investor confidence, as Hyun's influence over the company grew more pronounced and more troubling, Yuna Park was quietly, methodically, brilliantly building an empire from scratch. Lumina Tech was incorporated on a rainy Monday in April. The name was deliberate light, illumination, the antithesis of shadows and invisibility. Hyunmin handled the business structure and legal framework while Yuna assembled a small team of engineers she'd personally vetted. No one from Tech. No one who would carry old loyalties or whisper secrets to former colleagues. Just 5 brilliant minds who respected her vision and understood they were building something that would change everything. The work consumed her in the way only obsession can. She coded 18-hour days, barely sleeping, surviving on coffee and determination. The grief over her lost child had calcified into something harder, something that could be weaponized.